infinity brackets. You actually even use main block and you see a 7. So then
all right. So let me do just the.
Okay, so we're going to start the second part. A few of you are new, so I'm going to not completely reintroduce you.
No.
I just want to mention that Goldman will be teaching us for an hour about the organizational and curricular change. We'll be focusing now on the workshop where you will learn active learning.
So I think there's less than a handful of you that were in the first session. I don't want to repeat all of the broader curricular items that we covered there. So just for your benefit, though, this is what our curriculum looks like. It's a block structure. Then I'm hearing it sounds a lot like what your reporting system structure blocks. I'm hearing sounds a lot like what you're thinking about. Providing 2. The blue is the first year. The purple is technically the second year. The second year and into the third year are your required rotations, and then some of which continue into the fourth year with more room for electives. So that's what the curriculum looks like.
So this part is on the individual sessions and the perspective that we chose to come from, and it's a choice,
is that we wanted to use more active learning, break up the lecture time. Our faculty decided that it should be broken up every 15 minutes with some form of active learning. And that there was not one type of active learning that they wanted to engage in. They didn't want the curriculum to be all team-based, which some schools have gone to, because they felt that different learning styles learn differently, and they wanted to be able to use a variety of techniques. So it's active learning, and I combine that with what I call good instructional design,
and that's what this session focuses on. So I'm not sure where all of you in the room are on active learning. So I'll start out with the basics. One way to think about it is anything that's not lecture. So it's ubiquitous when we're sending in all those numbers. Anything counts, it's not lecture. So TBL, PBL, any other L, okay, is considered active learning, okay? But I think the critical thing is the second point, that it's not just doing something, it's doing something meaningful. And that's where the instructional design challenge comes in. So we can throw questions out to an audience, we can have them draw pictures, etc. But it's got to be meaningful in the context of what you're doing, so that the students can dot across the sessions that they're going to, so that they can think critically, etc. So that's the challenge to us when we program in, if you will, active learning. Any questions on this? Okay. So now we get to why do it. As I learned in the last session, this is my view of why do it, which I believe is backed up by the literature. What the literature does say is that active learning improves student motivation. Motivation is based on 2 things. The student values what you're about to teach, and they think that they can be successful with it. That's expected. So if you engage them in the material, they can try out and gain expectancy. If I do a problem in class, then I've tried it out, I have the expectancy now that I can be successful with your content. If you start out the session by showing me why I need to learn all this stuff and how it's relevant to my future practice, as opposed to saying, well, you're going to need to know this before, which sometimes works, okay? High motivation improves. There is research that says that attention span declines over time when people lecture. That time is generally 15 to 20 minutes in the literature. So engaging people wakes them up again. It does focus on higher order learning, and there are studies that show that students that have participated in sessions that are active retain the material longer in the short term and longer after they've graduated.
I think this is important too, is active learning is much more rewarding. It's hard to transition to do. It does take time. It's a lot easier to stand up here and read off of lecture notes. That's relatively easy. It's much more rewarding, though, to see the lights going on in people's faces when they're connecting the dots of the material because they're engaged in it. So to me, that's why we should pay attention to active learning. There's also this piece of good instructional design, and I'm gonna just give you a minute to read this. I'm not gonna read it for you. This is from a text by Fink on what a session is good should look like. I would suggest that we tend to concentrate on the stuff at the top, the application and knowledge, maybe not so much of the stuff towards the bottom, which in Fink's mind relates to the learning environment. That it's a positive learning environment, and also that students are learning without learning as they're learning content. Any thoughts on this? Any reactions? Are you already familiar with this? Then let me move on. So I want to differentiate active learning a little bit from a flipped classroom. Does anybody see a difference between the two? They are different. What do you see as the difference between the two? And I'm doing this because with our faculty, at least, active learning got totally misinterpreted by some as we're flipping the classroom. So what's the difference? Anybody else?
I think a flipped classroom, most of the material is like pre-recorded ahead of time, whereas if you have a team-based learning or POPs, there might be a very modest amount of pre-assigned work.
So I think of active learning as almost one form of flipping. And I use this, well, first I want to say we should be, I think, with particularly you medical students, cautious about flipping. This is from Mary Ellen Weimer, who writes the Faculty Focus blog or newsletter that you can get online. And it's got all these tips in it. I love it. You pick out stuff and send it out to the faculty. And she cautions us, this is the title of her article, she cautions us about the rush to flip. That it's kind of like everybody got on this bandwagon of flipping. And it's not necessarily the best thing to do. Because if the students can't self-direct their learning when they're listening to these pre-recorded lectures and know if they're actually absorbing the material the right way or not, then you expect them to apply it and they're not ready. For entry-level students in any discipline, I would not suggest flipping the classroom. The foundational knowledge is called foundational for a reason. Okay? It may not be appropriate for beginning students or for all learners. So everybody can't do this. If we all study on our own, let's just give them the test and say, okay, here's your medical degree. Why do they need to come to class, right? And it's not appropriate for all types of content. Some content that needs to be explained more deeply, maybe has more variations on a theme. So I like to use this thing I labeled the flipometer with our faculty, which talks about flipping in degrees. So our clinical faculty in particular misinterpreted active learning as a fully flipped classroom, which was described. Okay? We see it more in tiers, and the tiers are described here. So fully flipped is everybody comes in and we're engaged. Maybe we can do that with second-year residents and fellows. Okay? Unflipped is traditional lecture, and then there's a couple variations in the middle, which were arbitrary on our part, but we wanted to differentiate them. So a moment might be what I'm doing with you. I'm stopping briefly and asking you questions here and there. Okay? In our curriculum, 15-minute required, every 15-minute break with cycles. Every 15 minutes or so, with 10 minutes of engagement experiences. And I've given you examples in this article, which is from a pharmacology journal. It talks about different types of active learning and degrees. And what we did is we took the same types and we gave you examples. Okay. We don't have time today to go over, like a concept map and how that differs from a categorizing grid. It's explained in the documents, but these are all techniques that you can look at your material and say, maybe this would be a good thing that would fit to see if the students really understand physiology. I'll ask them to do a concept map of X, or I'll ask them to do a role play, or I'll ask them to tell me what's the hardest thing, what was the hardest concept for you to grasp. Can you put that in the form of a possible exam question? If I want for them to do. Okay? So you can see the example techniques on the side and the degrees of flipping. So something to think about if your faculty starts misinterpreting this. Because our rumor mill started and went a little out of control. They're flipping the classroom. You're supposed to just assign reading and come in and do cases. That gave me a nightmare for 2 solid weeks. Clinical faculty came in and did it, the students were lost. Okay, questions? All right. So I went through this with the earlier group in our Foundations of Medicine, which is our first year and a half. Our faculty came up with these parameters. They wanted to do active learning, lecture broken up every 15 minutes. In our clinical years, these are the other parameters. I'm not going to worry too much about going through them. But what I want to get through and spend some time in is the design worksheet. So those of you that were in the first session know that this emerged, or complexity principle of emergence, as a cornerstone of our curriculum. We post all of these for every one of our sessions on a faculty-accessible Blackboard site, so everybody can see what everybody else is doing. Okay, so if you want to know if you're teaching in block brain behavior, and you want to know what they covered in Foundations about, neurons, you can go look it up. So I encourage you to use this now and think about a session that you've recently taught while I'm going through this. So that's how you will hopefully get the most out of how do you transition to teaching.
If you're stopping every 15 minutes and putting attendance to learning, would that give you approximately half the time to teach the material? Like the now you're having 25 minutes of what you would taught at 15 minutes?
No, because you completely revise what the sessions look like. So you don't have the same sessions you had before. You have your science faculty, your stuff is all spread out all over the place. So you don't have the same lecture on, component XYZ you had before. It's all broken up and shattered to the wind. Okay? Right. So if you take this and you think of something that you taught in the last, month, it doesn't matter what it is, just for this purpose. Maybe something you thought went particularly well. And let's see what would happen if it was more in line with active learning. So that's the worksheet. It's based on this mnemonic that I developed that relates back to the principles of adult learning and principles of active learning and good instructional design. So the first all-important thing is what's our learning objective. This was the hardest thing for most of our faculty to write. I don't know about you, but our faculty had a really difficult time because they would write what they're teaching, not what the students were learning. So if you note that the statement of learning objective starts with, by the end of the session, the students will know or be able to do what? Okay, so you're teaching a session on classes of drugs. By the end of the session, what do you want the students to know or be able to do? Let's think about that. So we use this modification of Bloom's taxonomy, which asks you to pick the cognitive processing dimension you want the student to end up with. want them to apply their knowledge of classes of drugs to something, to possible treatment for X. Alright? So the ready learning objective could be the word fly, or it could be something under the staircase, as I call it. So you pick a verb, one verb. And I like 7-word learning objectives. Keeps it really concise. Okay? The second step is you pick the level, you pick this, okay, what are the related teaching strategies? So those are above the step. So if you're going to want them to end up being able to apply, you've got to give them some exercises to do or some practice sessions or whatever. If you lecture, you're only over here. So the person who lectures and then says, but the students can't apply the knowledge to a case. Well, of course they can't. Your teaching strategy, your learning objective is over here, and your teaching strategy is over here. They're never going to get there. Okay. You all, tell me where you are. You need to do that. So we know how long to spend on this part. Does it work for you? Is it new? Are you confused?
It works.
It works, makes sense? Okay. Harder to do. But so on the sheet, think about your learning objectives. Were they based on, for what you just taught, were they based on what you expected the student to know at the end? Or were your learning objective statements of what you were teaching? Two different things. It takes a while to make that flip. Okay. Moving on. So now we framed it. We get into what are we going to ask the students to do up front? In active learning, the students need to prepare something because it engages them and it gives them a warning of what you're about to talk about. If you just come into a room, if I had my druthers, I would have had to read some of this ahead of time. Okay? But if you just come into a room, you don't know what to expect. So some amount of pre-work. And we can talk about when the students really do it, etc. I'm not going to do it if you come in and you lecture me on the pre-work. But if you come in and you test me on the pre-work, the second time I come to your session, I'm going to do my pre-work. So the students are going to react to what we do.
Is that part of your curriculum?
Yep.
Those sessions, how do you run those?
It's on the Blackboard site, and it's labeled as to whether you need to know it at a deep knowledge level or you can just skim it.
But are you quizzing them at the beginning of each?
Some people are. So we leave it up to the faculty as to what they're going to do with the prep work. Okay? On the example from Basic Cell Organelles, okay? Her prep was a bunch of readings, okay? And she didn't ask them to do anything, but when they came in, because this was the very, very, very first session, okay? Usually I recommend that faculty ask the students something. Have 3 questions you want them to answer. Because if I can't answer them, then I better read the prep work. Okay? That's the first piece. Now we're in the room. Link to the prior knowledge and to the prep work. Wake up the brain. So it might have been a couple days or a couple weeks or a couple hours since I did the prep work. Remind me of what I did. Right? So on this, what she has here, she's asking them their familiarity with cell structure and organelles. She's not saying, are you familiar? She's saying something like, what do you remember about? So she's eliciting something from the room. Okay? So that's the link. So think about it. In your class, how did you start? Did you start by linking to something the students should already know or something you had assigned them to read? You can write notes in this to yourself. The detail tells you again why you would do it. That's in the gray space. The next step, and this is 1 minute. This is not a lot of time. The next step is also a minute. We call it the hook. Focus, attention, and see value. Remember I said motivation and learning is value and expectancy. So how do you see the value? you're going to do a session on bed sores. Why do I need to pay attention to this? Because half of the patients you're ever going to see who are hospitalized are going to have them. That's a lot. Why do I need to know about X drug? Because it's often misprescribed and people die when they take it and they shouldn't. Those are really strong hooks. Okay, we don't all have those kinds of hooks. What Jan did, Dr. Crum did in this one is she said, look, this is about the study of histology. It's the foundational knowledge. This is the basis of everything, people. Okay? It's necessary for you to understand what goes wrong. You got to get this. That's her hook. It's important. Pay attention. Stay awake. So think about, did you hook the students? And if you did, what did you say? Did you say something like, this is often misdiagnosed? Or people can die if you do this wrong? Or a third of the population has X and doesn't know it? Those are, substantial hooks. So if we go on to the next part, this is where we're really in the session now. But most people start without doing the link and the hook, they just get into the material. So what happens? My brain isn't woken up and I don't see the value, and now you're talking head. So now we want to engage them more into it. We might do a lecture, we might use PowerPoint, we might show video, whatever, but we're going to break it up. So in her case, if you look at her example, she's lecturing for 10 minutes with PowerPoint on histological techniques and measurement scales. And then she's asking them to draw a concept map in pairs, dyads. So get with your neighbor. Yes, you're in a lecture hall of 180 people. Get with your neighbor and draw a picture of this. And then get on your iPad and fill in the defining features matrix. So she's used 2 active learning things in a 25-minute span of time and has the whole class engaged. Then she projects some of the student stuff if you're following down this page with me. And then she has them label some things, and they're still working in pairs, okay? And then she goes into the transfer. So the transfer is, did I really learn this? And you're only going to know if you now ask students to apply it to a new situation. So you lock in the learning by doing a transfer. So she asks them, this is on the second page, individually now, you're working with your partner, now individually, label the organelles in an electron micrograph of a generic cell, and label the tissue types on a new set of pictures. And then she gives them the answers to tests. So she gives them 10 minutes to do it, and then gives them the answers. Okay? We also have, and I just spent a lot of time on this, but we also have asked the faculty if they want to get into the learning styles, and she's, on her example, you can see that she covered all of the major 4, and I had a separate page handout on the full learning styles. Questions? So that's the design worksheet. So think about what you did. How did you engage them? Did you use any active learning techniques, and did you do a transfer?
For the curriculum development, what was your culture like?
The same as it is now, unfortunately. We're really working on it. This is a big issue with us right now.
This seems to make session attendance a little bit more necessary. You can't get this from notes, presumably.
Yeah.
Where do you get a dyad in your building service?
And so I have a little discrepancy with our relatively new academic team on this, who said every school is monopolizing lectures, doing lecture capture. And a couple of us, including me, I'm not the only one, feel like as long as you're going to do that, the students think they don't have to come. Okay? But nobody wants to give up some of the lectures. So we had an interesting thing. One of our anatomy professors got a lot of complaints. She's the head of the endocrine block. She got a lot of complaints because one of the faculty teachers was using a laser pointer. Laser pointers don't show up on staff, though. So that all the faculty teach with a laser pointer. We get the comment, there's a board over there, a chalkboard, and I might use it, okay? The camera didn't says on every syllabus, the faculty believe that engaged learning is better. It says on every syllabus that the faculty have worked very hard to make it engaged learning, etc. But we have this debate all the time. Are the students adults or not? Okay? Should attendance be mandatory or not? We just had another round of this. We voted not to, the faculty voted, it's their decision not to have mandatory attendance except when patients are present. Okay? If you don't want to have patients come in and have nobody show up. It varies a lot by faculty member. There are some faculty members for whom the entire 180 of them will be there. And they lecture and they use defining features matrix. One of our guests is a immunology professor who does that. Another one is a biochemistry professor who uses the techniques, okay? And others, the students don't. They kind of, I hate to say it, this is what they said to me, I don't want to sound nasty. They sniff it out in the first session or two.
I was just going to comment, in the medical school microbiology course, we give a small grading bonus for students who come, and we do a lot of the clickers. So we do case studies with the clickers. So we get about, until we hit the cutoff margin, okay, which is when they qualify for their grading bonus, we get about 30 to 40% of the students. Okay, and then spring term they start getting word fever, and they hit their 75% mark, so it starts like that. But until then, it goes down, and the students that qualify, in other words, that get their bonus, they do substantially better on the shelf exam at the end of the year. Yeah. But it's a self-selected group. It's not a control group, right? Because we don't have control groups.
So we used to do that with our pathology groups. The pathology professor preferred the carrot rather than the stick. And said they can get an extra 1 or 2 points depending on how many percentages of a small group work they show up for. But she did that very successfully in the room. We don't have pathology anymore. She was suggesting the same approach, which we're now trying to transition to. What the faculty will tell you is that the students who come to class sit down in the first 3 workers. They tell the faculty they've done 3 work. No one's wrong.
When we run small group sessions or pop sessions, where they still get this bonus, then we get about 90% turnout. So, I mean, you can use, and we have a pass-fail system, so they're not, trying to go for the honors.
Our experience, your experience, and everybody else's experience really is not that different from what I've heard from folks, whether it's in science or I mean, I have a good friend that uses this, and he was giving me a tour. We were working on LCME stuff together. He was giving me a tour, and we walked into the library, and he said, "Here's the other half of the class." And I said, "Well, what are they doing in here?" He said, "Studying the material that's being developed and delivered in there." And they were curious about it. You had a question for that. So they're in here. Okay, we have this handout. So if you look at concept maps, they're really, really good technique, and they're on where they go? They're on page 5. So it's a diagram. Okay? So you might have taught something, and then you say to the students, okay, I've been talking for 15 minutes. Draw a concept map that connects the major things that we've talked about. You might give them your concept map if the topic is particularly difficult and you think they're going to have trouble digesting it. One of our anatomy faculty does that for sessions. I can't tell you what they are. He kind of puts the headings and he leaves open spaces for the students to fill things in. Concept map is just a drawing. It's good for things like physiology. Okay. The defining features matrix is O, and that's on the page before. So that's where you might categorize things. So you might say, what are the different categories of drugs, and then what are their characteristics? What are their what do you call it? Not things filled in. You have the students fill the rest of it in. Okay? So,
can I clarify these various tools you're using?
yeah.
They're only provided to the students who are in attendance as part of their learning experience.
The tools are for the faculty.
Such as doing a concept map, etc.
Right.
If that's being conducted, only the students in attendance
That's
are
right.
participating in that.
Correct.
And is there a video to make that available for students who are not in attendance?
No.
And when they show the
We're not
board
ready.
complain about that sort of thing, how's the best way to
The
address that?
faculty uniformly says the same thing. We have built a curriculum based on classroom attendance. Please come. We're not building an online curriculum. Like we would still do the ELAT stuff, but it'd be delivered very differently. We're not building a curriculum for you to stay home in your jammies and learn medical school stuff.
Any laboratories or students slides? And they're just incorporated.
The slides are incorporated in the PowerPoint.
I mean, for that to actually be doing.
There are lab sessions. Yeah. There are a lot of lab sessions that are in everything from CPR on.
Because immediate feedback and maybe we could go a little bit look at it too by the time to class. What about consider using the pre-test and the post-test being one question? MD or questions or something that we can use. So you're going to see this again. This is what we're reinforcing our lecture and demonstrations. And you're going to take post-test and here's your correct answer.
Yeah, we wouldn't use the same questions, we would make them different. And we use it at the end for every block as well.
As individual sessions.
So an individual session, what we would suggest is the pre-work and then some sample questions or things to do. It could be a reflection. It could be something you're answering. What's the difference between A and B? It could be an actual test with multiple guests. It could take a variety of forms depending on the content. Okay? So,
Is working with 180 students? What's the most effective?
for
For doing
active learning,
yes.
there's no effective number, there's only an effective technique.
Okay.
So to me, the right technique is based on your learning objective. It doesn't matter how many people are in the room. If the technique is have them do a concept map and you want to have them do it individually, think through why they're doing it individually. And if you think it's better to have them do it together because it might be newer material, have them do it together. So to me, the active learning technique has to relate back to the learning objective. Okay? So some of the feedback that we got, we're not perfect, right? Some of the feedback that we got first on the faculty side. So this is about developing it. So when the faculty that, weren't under the tent were kind of told about this, you can imagine. So we got everything from on the under-enthusiastic side. These students are paying $1 bazillion for me to tell them what they know. I'm the expert, right? Okay, they can't learn it on their own. Lecture halls weren't designed for active learning, etc. I have to reduce too much content to do that active learning stuff, etc., etc. And then somebody talked to one student who didn't like it and spread this massive rumor that the students hated it. We looked through all of that. On the other side, we have people that did the reverse and they totally flipped, and it was a big flop, a really big flop. The students got up and walked out because they couldn't even understand what the person was asking them to do. And the person ended up in my office, the cancer physician, and we reworked his session, and he delivered it the next time, and it was not as quick, and it was just fine. He really cared. I mean, he was heartbroken. So we had the extremes of reactions from the faculty on the development side. Once they delivered it, we also had some extremes. This is a transition nobody likes change. Okay? So this is still the faculty. We had the students aren't doing the prep work. So So they complain students aren't doing the prep work. So I say to them, let's take out your design worksheet. Some of them, even though we quote approved them in advance, some of them came in very, very late. So we could give faculty help. So I'd say, well, what are you doing at the beginning of the session? Well, I'm going over, I'm doing a 15-minute lecture on the chapter. Oh, it's a little much. So you're signing a reading for an hour, you're lecturing for it on 15 minutes. I wouldn't read it either. Of course I'm not doing the prep work. Okay? The same students participate each time. We have to learn how to work the room. Okay, that's just teaching technique. That's just, okay, let's hear from somebody over here. Now I'm ignoring this group because they've been talking all the time. So some of it was technique, okay? Have you used too much content? What are your learning objectives? What do the students really need to know? We found that about a quarter of our science content was stuff that was really, really, really interesting, but honestly, they don't need to know it. Okay? I can't control the small groups. 180 people, I can't control, 25 small groups. Designate a student for each group. Tell them the first thing they need to do is designate a student leader and give them a list of what they're supposed to get done. You're amazed at what happens. It gets done. Okay? Overzealous, on the other side. So faculty would develop it, and they'd say, wow, these people are alive. They're not dead like the people we had in the legacy curriculum, and they ask great questions, and they're integrating the material, and they were doing much better on the clinical skills and reasoning. The I-hard physician who loves to lecture said, I need to get better at letting go of content. He's our highest rated faculty member right now. He's microbiology. Our highest rated faculty member. The next time I'm going to try to, they've been doing think, pair, share. I'm tired of it. Students get really tired, which is the limit kind of content next time. Okay, Dr. So-and-so, what content do you have that fits the concept map? Let's work with you on that.
Can you define that think, pair, share again?
So I put up a question and I say, think about your answers individually, okay? And then I let 2 minutes go by and I say, okay, Kara, talk to the person next to you, okay? And maybe it's a multiple choice question that's up there. So pick your answer and you pick B and you pick C. But I don't know that, okay? And then what I might do, if I were doing it with poll everywhere, I'd poll the room, and if 95% of the room got the right answer, I would move on to something else, because I'm going to waste a lot of time. But let's say it's 50-50 and it's between B and C. Okay, so I'm going to say, pair up, talk it out. Then I'm going to ask you the question again. I'm going to ask you to vote. Okay? And now let's say the room goes 95%, I can go on. I can say, explain why it was B. You explain it, great explanation. Move on.
So that's usually done with an audience response.
It could be, or it could be done with hands. You don't necessarily need technology for everything. So on the student side, yeah.
I want to know a little more about the preparatory content before we move on.
Okay.
I think I haven't quite understood the most optimal way to do that. So if I have a current lecture that's 50 minutes of content, I want to take some of that content, take it out of what I'm delivering in that lecture, and give it to the class. Am I giving them a summary of the entire content, or do I select maybe a couple of key things and give them as content? Is there a way to visualize how to approach that?
So we give them the basics, depending on where you are in the curriculum. But let's say you're at the beginning. We give them the basics, not the whole thing. Say this is of my 50 minutes of material. This is the foundational stuff. Read it in advance and answer these 3 questions or whatever. Okay? And then you freed up a third of your material for your class time.
And is that perhaps taking out 4 or 5 of the key PowerPoints, perhaps adding text explanations with them, and having that as a preparatory, or should I have some reason? I'm just trying
It's up to you. I mean, there's there's no one way. Some people do videos, some people do lecture capture videos like Camtasia, something like that, PowerPoint lecture. Other people assign reading. It depends on how dense the reading is. It's really hard to answer without.
But time-wise, it should sort of match their effort to do that.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that our faculty found, or that we all found, was that the students were taking much longer than the faculty thought to do free work. So 15 minutes for you to read something might be an hour for me to read something. So you have to keep that in mind. It's hard to give you a one-size-fits-all on it, but you're asking the right questions. You just want to think it through with your material. So let me move on to the student side. So the students got this more active stuff, right? And so, some of them right away decided this isn't for me. I went better when I lecture back, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you just spinach is good for you. I don't like active learning. It takes up precious time. Okay? And we said things like you're going to work in a team the rest of your life. So you have to be able to, where you're learning this stuff. The faculty member didn't know how to teach. They didn't review the free work. The technology didn't work. It was a fair share. And they tried to cover 100 slides in 30 minutes. The students can sniff it out. And they can sniff out if you're nervous about it. So you've got to walk in there fully charged to do it. If it doesn't work, then change it the next time. But if you show that you're insecure, if you stand there, I have faculty members standing there saying, they're making me do this active learning stuff, so pair up. I mean, come on. I was in the room when he said this. I'm not making this up. He asked me to do a teaching evaluation of it. Okay? Or, I really don't want to do this, but. Okay? On the other side, again, the students that were coming to class, that were participating, that were getting honors, said things like this. This is harmonized integration. These are common issues that we got across most of the blocks, and so these are the things that I keep on working on, and some of the things that I've chosen today to focus on with you. Don't completely flip the class. I mean, I very rarely say do this, don't do that to a group, but honestly, don't flip the class with first-year students completely. Okay? People like roadmaps. They like session outlines. If you've got a group of people, our students are half science majors and half non. So you don't have everybody that's, not all prepared the same way. So particularly for some of the heavy science intensive things, they like an outline of what you're going to cover. It doesn't have to be detailed. They can fill in the blanks. But I'm going to cover, I've got 4 objectives for this 2-hour session. This is the first one. And then stop and do a summary. Or have them help you do a summary as part of the active learning. Really, really works. You don't all want to teach the same way. That's going to get old really, really fast. And if everybody does think fair share, it's going to get nauseating after about 2 days. Okay? Real active learning. The students told us, I need a break from listening to people. But make it real. Don't throw out a question, and then if nobody raises their hand, you've got to wait. You just have to have the fortitude to stand there and wait. Too many and too dense slides, over and over and over again. And I said this before, slides with colored backgrounds. We're using iPads, they can't write on the slide if they have a dark background. We had to learn that. The transfer doesn't always occur, so the students walk out the room wondering if they can actually use what they learned and understand it. So as they're applying the design worksheet concepts, those were some of the common pieces of feedback that they gave us. And then all of this caused us to generate these tip sheets for faculty as we were going. I mentioned before that our faculty development was decentralized. But as things came up, we had to find ways of getting information out with 350 different people teaching. Okay? So So we did, after the first 2 weeks, we did the thing, the tip sheet, you have them all, they're attached to the design worksheet. What helps the students learn in the revised curriculum? Like the slide I just covered. You have a tip sheet on at the slide presentations on using active learning, how to prompt discussion, how to make the prep effective, okay? And then if you're going to flip the classroom, what to consider. That's basically the teaching side of this position. Any other questions? Or anything else you want to talk about? Yeah.
So obviously there is a faculty resource, that's sort of the resident learning or expert.
Me and the instructional designer who works with me.
And when you do your preliminary course or block review, how in depth is the information you get? Just, okay, here are the learning objectives. What feedback do you?
No, so on this one, that's number 14, section 14. You see these check marks? This means that the instructional designer sees through it. So she's looked to make sure that the learning objectives map to a block objective at the right level. They have to be at the same level or lower. Otherwise, you're teaching at too high a level to the block. So she checks those off. She makes sure that these things are appropriate. Not necessarily having any science knowledge, which she doesn't, but that a hook is really a hook, and a link is really a link, etc. At first, we both reviewed all of these. Now she just does them, and I do a very cursory review. So there's one of these on every section. And then the ubiquitous, that you can't see the numbers here, they ran off the page, but these would be like minutes. And when this okay is okay, the faculty get a ping, your session's okay, it's on the Blackboard site for the faculty to access. The students don't see this. Because sometimes things don't work out the way you think that you want them to. So you don't want the student to say, you didn't do half of this. You didn't, whatever. You didn't do a concept map. When I do a concept map, because when I asked 3 questions after the pre-read, I had to spend more time on that. So I had to cut something out. Okay? But this is mostly for faculty to see what each other is doing. So there's one of these on every one of the 700 UME sessions in the first year and a half. And I read them all. And I still know more about medicine than I did when I started.
This is a little off on the side, because you haven't been talking about assessment. You said you used the National Board of Medical Shelf exams that were created. Has that been a good experience for you?
Yeah. The students like it. Usually there's 2 or 3 exams per course. There are also might be small quizzes if you look at what's part of the course grade. Okay?
And they take an MBME exam at the end?
They take it at the end, usually after they take the final exam for the block. Usually like in CPR, there's 3 exams, C, P, and R. And then they take the MBME. And they usually take it the next day. And they like it. They ask for more of them. We didn't have them for every block in the beginning. I think we had 3. And they asked for more practice exams.
Because we tried the shelf exams, and I know other schools have nearby have tried using the MBME exams. They say they found too many antique and aged items that hadn't been culled from the MBME pool, but you haven't experienced that. Okay.
Our faculty has not said anything like that I have heard.
Okay.
And they've been they're the ones making up the exams.
Okay.
And
They
so
would have heard it from the students.
Yeah, and to somebody else's point, when they ask for exam questions, let's say they need 3, they might ask for 5 from each area, and then they've got a couple extra for those practice things that we were talking about.
And so to follow up on that, so do you use the NBME just as an assessment tool for how they answer it, or is that part of the grade?
It's part of the grade, but it's a very small part. It's like 1 or 2 points.
current second year courses, they're required to take the shelf exam, and it counts for 15 or 20% of the grade. So the students maybe don't always like it, but there's not a big student who with that idea.
I have a question. I think this went on before. You said you decentralized some of Catholic development and maybe department-based. But when it was department-based, who was doing it? So you just went through the complete thing.
We also
That's what I thought.
an instructional design. So for example, Thursday morning we're going to Children's National, which is our pediatric department, and we're going to work with the clerkship faculty for an hour on design worksheets. Because as the clerkships are transitioning their didactic sessions to active learning, they'll be able to do that.
What do you have a typical day for what you look like you want to see for the day? So you're
Yeah, it would be like have that. A day a week might look like Tuesday or Thursday morning, we're going to have CSR, clinical skills assessment. And it's going to have to be repeated because of our class size and our setup and everything else. So Monday we might have sessions, some of them are 1 hour, some of them are 2 hours, some of them are 3 hours. Okay, so you're going to have school basically from 9 to 12, and then from 1 to about 4. Some days we're going to have, maybe once a month, we're going to have the professional development session. So Tuesday, Thursday, we kind of went over. Wednesday, Monday, Friday, are going to look pretty similar. We're going to talk a lot of the time.
The block, any example blocks you want to give, what's your division between the foundational science or basic science lectures, clinical science lectures that are given by clinicians? You talk a lot about, you mentioned a lot of different lectures, and you said, well, this was an oncologist, or this was a MD, does micro.
I don't know if this is going to help or not, but let's try it since I have it. So this you don't have. This is a bunch of templates that I prepared for an article that didn't get accepted, but who cares? Okay, so these are the content groups for the Foundations course. Okay. So if you look at genes and genetics, all right, where I am here, you see the cursor? So that's one session that might be 3 hours. These people are teaching together. The biochemist and the OBGYN are teaching that session together, and they've sat down and prepared it together. Okay?
Well, interesting if you have one of that, the organ system blocks, right? Yeah. And the introduction.
I don't. No. I don't. This is just more detail of the same thing. In the organ system blocks, though, there'll be some that are team taught, if you will, and then there'll be some that are self-taught.
Just one or two of them as an example to give us a breakdown. Because right now you're kind of in a foundational science element. So the first 2 years are really heavy foundational science. So that's what you're teaching. The clinical science department is not very involved in those first 2 years. How many of those do you need to be doing?
Depends on the topic. Right. It depends on the topic. There are people that would say the clinician should teach all the basic science. We had a couple of clinicians who said that. And we said, yeah. Right. And they wanted clinicians to be the block directors.
Right.
And we said, no. Okay. And so we can give you a couple of, I can give you as many examples as you want of the schedules. I can do all of it. I just don't have to access.
Do you have a question? Yeah, people learn to have what the teacher is teaching is different from what the learner is learning.
Okay. So on the learning objectives, okay, let's use this as an example. What I did today in this session is I reviewed for we do in our curriculum, right? I review how we keep track of what's being taught and how we help faculty transition to active learning. What did you learn?
I learned techniques for if I want to do active learning. One of the techniques I can look to see which project material.
There you go. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I am. They can just take it.